In 1932, 5 nuns vanished without a trace from a convent built on the edge of the Atlantic. For 90 years, the world believed they simply walked into the storm until a wall was opened and the truth began to breathe again. What investigators found buried behind that altar didn't just rewrite a crime scene, it rewrote human history. 5 sisters, 1 secret, and the code that still sings. If you believe every secret leaves an echo, hit subscribe, because this story's echo hasn't stopped. The first snow of November fell softly on the roof of St. Hilda's convent, dusting the slate tiles like confectioner's sugar. Inside, candlelight flickered along stone corridors, throwing long shadows that trembled across the crucifixes hung on every wall. Mother Superior Agnes wrote by lamplight, her quill scratching rhythmically against the thick ledger paper. Attendance, confessions, food inventory. She paused, listening to the wind slide beneath the door, the convent's winter breath. At precisely 9:30, the chapel bell tolled once. 5 figures in gray habits crossed the courtyard toward the old chapel. Sister Martha, Sister Clara, Sister Isolde, Sister Ruth, and Sister Eleanor. Their voices whispered hymns that the snow swallowed whole. The following morning, the bell tower stood silent. No footprints marked the yard, no lamps burned in the dormitory, and the chapel door, usually bolted from the inside, hung open, swinging gently against the frame. Detective Harold Finch arrived before noon, summoned from Portland to the remote coastal parish. The constable who met him on the steps looked pale, his wool coat spattered with melted snow. 5 of 'em, sir, vanished sometime after Compline prayers. Finch stepped inside, his boots clicking on the cold stone. The air smelled faintly of wax and seawater. He'd handled disappearances before. Fishermen lost at sea, travelers run off the road. But not 5 women under God's roof. In the chapel, candles still burned. On the altar lay an open hymnal turned to Psalm 51. Have mercy upon me, O God. Beside it, a wooden rosary, broken beads scattered like seeds. Finch crouched to pick one up. The bead was sticky. He rubbed his thumb and saw the faintest smear of dark brown. Blood, he murmured. He ordered the building sealed by dusk. The town had gathered beyond the iron gates, farmers, fishermen, wives clutching their coats. Some crossed themselves, others whispered that the devil had come to St. Hilda's. 3 days later, the Atlantic delivered its first clue. A fishing boat out of Rockland found a small wooden box drifting among the kelp. Inside, wrapped in linen, was a brass key etched with the convent's crest, and a single scrap of paper reading, "We are not lost, we are chosen." The handwriting matched that of Sister Isolde, the youngest of the vanished. Finch held the note beneath a lantern, the salt water drying to pale circles on the paper. "Chosen for what?" he asked aloud. No one answered. Winter tightened around the town. Rumors bloomed like frost. Parish records showed no signs of forced entry, no theft, no signs of struggle. Yet dogs refused to enter the chapel after dark, whining and clawing at the door. By January, the diocese closed St. Hilda's entirely. The convent fell silent. But silence, in St. Augustine, had a way of fermenting. Every decade or so, someone claimed to hear singing near the cliffs, 5 voices carried on the wind. Each time, locals would light candles at the church gate, mutter prayers, and move on. The case of the missing sisters faded into myth, until in the summer of 2022, renovation workers restoring the collapsed east wall of the old chapel uncovered a cavity behind the plaster, a narrow vault sealed with iron nails. Inside lay bones wrapped in decayed linen, and beneath them a silver rosary whose beads were dark with age and dried blood. The forensics team cataloged the remains for DNA testing, though most doubted there'd be anything left to analyze. After 90 years, the report reached Clara Hensley, host of the true crime channel After the Silence, 2 weeks later. And that's where our story begins again. Not in 1932, but in the glow of blue LED monitors, with digital renderings of a convent that once kept its secrets by candlelight. The restoration crew had already left when Clara Hensley arrived at St. Hilda's. Evening light poured through the skeletal windows of the ruined chapel, gilding the scaffolding and the half-collapsed altar in a honeyed glow. The smell of wet plaster and salt filled the air. She parked her van beside the fence and slung her camera bag over her shoulder. The logo on her windbreaker read, After the Silence. Her true crime channel that had somehow grown from a midnight hobby into a million-subscriber obsession. Cases like this, half myth, half evidence, were her bread and butter. Still, the moment she stepped onto the cracked marble floor, she felt the kind of hush that no microphone could capture. Clara Hensley? A man called from near the apse. He was tall, in a dust-streaked field jacket, a pair of nitrile gloves hanging from one pocket. David Marrow, State Forensics. We spoke on email. They shook hands. His grip was dry, professional. We're done for the day, he said. But since the diocese gave you provisional access, I can show you what we found. He led her past the overturned pews to the east wall. The plaster had been stripped back, exposing rough granite and a square recess big enough to fit a human body. Within it, a steel evidence crate sat on a folding table, sealed and tagged. That cavity was hidden behind the cross, Marrow explained. We think it was sealed sometime in the late 30s. The contents were wrapped in linen, 5 separate bundles. 5, Clara repeated, the word tightening in her throat. Like the 5 sisters. He nodded. We've sent bone samples to the state lab. Initial isotope tests matched the coastal region, consistent with local burial or concealment. There was also this. He held up a plastic sleeve containing a silver rosary. The crucifix was bent, as if crushed by weight, and the beads were almost black. Blood residue, old but still viable. DNA? She asked. We'll know in a few weeks. But the lab tech said something interesting. The residue came from at least 2 individuals. Clara lifted her camera and began to film slow pans across the wall, narrating softly. Behind the east cross of St. Hilda's, a hidden vault. 5 bundles of bone and a rosary stained with blood. For 90 years, this chapel has held its breath. Marrow watched her work with mild curiosity. You really think people will sit through an hour of this? They always do, Clara said. They want truth served cold. Later that night, she reviewed her footage in a rented room above the only diner in town. The neon sign outside flickered eat, eat, eat against the window pane. She paused on a frame, showing the recess behind the altar. Even in the dim light, the pattern of soot around it looked almost deliberate, 5 arcs radiating outward like petals. She scribbled notes. Possible ritual, symbol. Then another line. Why build wall from inside? A soft knock sounded on the door. It was the innkeeper's daughter, holding a folded envelope. Lady downstairs left this for you, she said. Inside the envelope lay a single black and white photograph. 5 nuns stood on the convent steps, smiling faintly at the camera written on the back, in a looping hand. They sang even after the door closed. No sender's name. Clara stared at the photo until the diner's neon burned her eyes. She flipped it over again. 5 faces frozen mid-song, one of them looking slightly away, as if towards something out of frame. The next morning, she drove to the county archive. a squat brick building that smelled of dust and citrus polish. The clerk, a white-haired woman named Ruth Henley, recognized the convent name immediately. "My aunt used to bring them eggs," Ruth said, as she fetched a stack of brittle ledgers. "People said they were good women, but strict. Mother Agnes ran the place like a ship. When they vanished, half the town thought God took them. The other half thought the sea did." Clara flipped through yellowed police reports. Detective Harold Finch's name appeared on every page. His handwriting was cramped, factual, no sign of forced entry. One rosary found broken residence report, chanting near cliffs night prior. She looked up. "Did anyone ever find their families?" Ruth shook her head. "Most of them were orphans from the orphanage in Portland St. Hilda's, took them in as noviciotes, meaning no one to claim the bodies," Clara murmured. Ruth tapped her chin thoughtfully. "You know, 2 years after the sisters went missing, someone burned the orphanage records. Whole wing went up. They said it was faulty wiring. But my father swore he smelled kerosene. Back at the convent, afternoon light slanted through the roof beams like bars." Clara set up her tripod near the altar and began filming her narration for episode 1. "It's been 90 years since the nuns of St. Hilda's walked into the snow and vanished. But hidden in this wall, the past has begun to speak again, through blood, bone, and silence." As she spoke, a sound broke the stillness, a low, hollow knock from somewhere within the wall. She froze, microphone recording. Another knock, softer. Then silence. Wind, she told herself. Just wind moving through the stone. But when she replayed the audio later, there were 3 distinct knocks. Then, a faint female voice whispering something that sounded like mercy. She sat back in her chair, headphones trembling in her hands. Her pulse quickened not with fear, but with that terrible thrill every investigator feels when the dead seem ready to talk. 2 weeks later, the lab results arrived. She met Marrow again, in his mobile unit, parked beside the chapel. "Preliminary DNA came back," he said, flipping open a folder. "Mitochondrial matches confirm 5 female individuals of European descent, ages roughly 20 to 35. All share partial maternal haplogroups, suggesting they were related, half-siblings most likely." "Half-siblings?" Clara repeated. 5 nuns, same mother?" "That's the implication. And here's the kicker. We found a 6th profile on the rosary. Male. Could it belong to Detective Finch? A priest?" Morrow shook his head. "It's Namabuan contamination. The degradation pattern's identical to the others. Whoever he was entombed, or at least present, when those remains were sealed." He closed the folder. "We're running the male DNA through genealogical databases. If there's a living descendant, we'll find them." Clara gazed at the cracked crucifix hanging above the recess. For the first time, she noticed that the figure of Christ was missing its right hand. The remaining wrist ended in a smooth stump, as if snapped deliberately. She whispered into her recorder, 5 sisters of one mother, a 6th man in the wall, and a missing hand on the cross. Her voice trembled with awe. What kind of faith requires that kind of silence? Outside, the tide rolled in against the cliffs, and the bells of St. Hilda's, long rusted still, gave a single accidental chime. The lab's fluorescent lights hummed like a hive. Clara watched through the glass as a technician in a white coat pipetted tiny drops of solution into a tray of wells, glowing faintly blue. On the monitor above, a chain of green peaks scrolled across the screen, the digital fingerprint of a century-old mystery. Dr. Soren Malik, head of the main state forensic genealogy unit, joined her at the window. His tie hung loose, coffee cup in hand. "You don't usually get usable sequences from samples that old," he said. Whoever preserved those bodies, intentionally or not, did a good job. Clara glanced at her recorder. You said you were cross-matching the male DNA? We ran it through GED profiles and the open-source genealogical banks. Took longer than expected, but we got a familial hit. He flipped open a folder. A 92-year-old patient in a Bangor nursing home. Name's Bernard Finch. Clara's pulse quickened. Detective Harold Finch's descendant? Grandnephew. But here's the weird part. The match isn't paternal. It's direct. The male DNA from the rosary is almost certainly Harold Finch himself. She stared at him. So, the detective who investigated the case was somehow inside the vault? Malik nodded slowly. Or at least his blood was. That evening, the rain came in thin silver threads across the windshield as Clara drove north to Bangor highway lights, smeared across the glass like strokes of paint. Her voice memo recorder sat on the dashboard, blinking red. If Finch's blood was in the chapel, it means either he was injured during the investigation or he was part of the crime. Either way, history is wrong, and the past is about to speak. At the nursing home, she found Bernard Finch propped in a chair near a window overlooking the Penobscot River. His eyes were cloudy but alert. You're the TV lady, he rasped. My nurse said you were asking about my uncle. I'm making a documentary, Clara said gently. About St. Hilda's? Bernard gave a dry chuckle. Knew that place would crawl out of the grave one day. She set her recorder between them. You knew him well? When I was a boy. He came back from that convent different. Quit the force. Started drinking. Said he heard the sisters singing in his sleep. Bernard rubbed his temple. One night, he burned all his notebooks out behind the shed. Told my father, it's better they stay with God. Did he ever say what he found? Only once. Said he'd sealed the wall himself. To keep something in. Back in her motel room, Clara reviewed the audio. Finch's confession echoed in her mind. To keep something in. She pulled out the photograph she'd received earlier. Under bright lamplight, she noticed faint scratches along the margin, almost like a code. She enlarged it on her laptop and adjusted the contrast. Letters emerged, carved with a pin into the emulsion. Psalm 51-7. She opened her notebook, flipping back to her earlier notes. Psalm 51. The same verse left open on the altar in 1932. Purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. She whispered the line aloud, goose flesh rising along her arms. The verse was about purification, about washing away sin. What sin required 5 lives and a wall? 2 days later, Dr. Malik called again. Clara, we've got another update. We extracted mitochondrial DNA from the linen bindings. The fibers had traces of sweat from a male donor distinct from Finch. The genome matches a living person. Who? He hesitated. You. Clara blinked. That's impossible. We double-checked. Your maternal haplogroup aligns with one of the nuns, Sister Isolde. You're a distant descendant, maybe through an illegitimate line before she joined the convent. The line went quiet, except for the hum of the connection. That can't be right, Clara said finally. My family's from Ohio. Records back then were messy, Malik said. But the genetic link is real. It might explain why you're drawn to the case. After the call, Clara sat motionless, listening to the radiator hiss. The walls of the motel seemed to tilt slightly, as if the room itself had shifted under the weight of revelation. Her own blood ran through the story she'd come to tell. She drove back to St. Hilda's at dawn. Fog clung to the cliffs, and gulls wheeled silently above the ruins. Inside, the air smelled of salt and charred wax. Her flashlight swept across the stone, catching glints of metal, where investigators had left markers. At the base of the recess, beneath a tarp, lay the crates containing the remains. She knelt beside them, touching the cold lid. "Isolde," she whispered. The name felt familiar on her tongue, like a word remembered from childhood. She turned on her camera. "Today I learned that one of the vanished nuns shares my DNA. Maybe this story didn't find me by accident. Maybe blood calls to blood." A sound made her pause. Footsteps outside, crunching gravel. She swung her light toward the doorway. Nothing. Only fog swirling through the open frame. Yet on the audio, a whisper slid beneath the wind. "Welcome home." Later, in the mobile lab, Malik showed her the digital reconstruction of one of the skulls. "We've done a 3D facial approximation," he said. "This is Sister Isolde." On the monitor appeared the gentle face of a young woman, with high cheekbones and a faint cleft in her chin. Clara's breath caught. The resemblance was unmistakable. The same eyes, the same mouth. Malik studied her expression. "You see it too." "She looks like my mother," Clara said quietly. He zoomed in on the cranial fractures. Cause of death was blunt trauma, hammer or masonry tool, consistent with construction implements of the era. So, they were killed before the wall was sealed. Likely. But here's another layer. Inside the cranial cavities, we found trace dust containing quicklime. Whoever did it tried to accelerate decomposition. That's not religious burial. That's concealment. Clara stared at the screen. The story was no longer abstract. It was her lineage staring back at her. That night, she recorded her thoughts for the next episode. Detective Finch's blood inside the wall. 5 sisters, half-siblings, one of them tied to me by DNA. Every new fact bends the line between investigator and subject. If I'm part of their story, then finishing it isn't journalism. It's inheritance. Her phone buzzed. An email with no sender ID. Subject line: "Eukaryer sin." Attached was a scanned page from a 1932 diary, the ink sepia and blurred. "Confession. 1 child survived, hidden before the ceiling. The rest, sacrificed for purity." Beneath the writing was a fingerprint in dried blood. Clara sat frozen, the screen's glow painting her face white. 1 child survived. She whispered to the empty room. What if that child's line never ended? Outside, the wind rose against the shutters, moaning like a choir that had waited 90 years to be heard. Morning fog drifted low over the cemetery, adjoining St. Augustine Parish. The convent's bell tower, cracked, vine-covered, rose like a spine through the mist. Clara parked beside the rectory, her breath visible in the chill. She'd barely slept. The diary page from the anonymous email was still open on her phone. The words "1 child survived" seared into her mind. Inside the rectory, Father Thomas Greer waited by a tall bookshelf, stacked with parish records. His beard was silver, his eyes soft behind wire frames. "You're the journalist," he said, shaking her hand. The bishop called ahead. "He said you had questions about our archives." "I'm trying to find where this came from." Clara slid the printed diary fragment across his desk. The handwriting matches an entry from 1932, maybe by one of the priests attached to St. Hilda's. Father Thomas adjusted his glasses, reading carefully. His brow furrowed. That's Father Matthias Corwin's hand. He was confessor to the sisters before the disappearances. He opened a drawer and withdrew a leather-bound book, edges curled with age. We keep copies of his ledgers for historical study. Clara leaned closer as he turned the crackling pages. Each entry listed confessions in careful anonymous script. Sins of pride, sins of doubt. Then one dated October 27th, 1932. 5 came to me burdened with knowledge of flesh. They feared the Lord's light, no longer burned in them. One begged mercy for the child she carried, a secret heavier than her vows. I told her penance would cleanse them all. Clara's voice faltered, unborn. Father Thomas exhaled through his nose. It seems at least one of the sisters was pregnant. A grave scandal in that time. The diocese would have silenced it utterly. Who was the father? He closed the ledger gently. No name given. But Corwin's later notes mention a man who entered the cloister under false pretense to restore faith. Possibly a visiting priest or an investigator. Harold Finch, Clara murmured. He could have been both. The priest escorted her to the basement archives. Dust motes spun in the beam of her flashlight. Metal shelves groaned under the weight of decades of sealed boxes. He pointed to one labeled St. Hilda's, Corwin Papers, restricted. "May I?" she asked. He hesitated. "Technically, you should petition the bishop. But if this helps souls find peace, perhaps God forgives a small trespass." Inside, she found faded photographs of the sisters, letters in Latin, and a set of small glass vials corked with wax. Each bore a name written in ink: Martha, Ruth, Isolde, Clara, Eleanor. The contents looked like grains of salt. "Relics?" she asked. Father Thomas nodded. They believed fragments of a body held power. But these were never approved relics. Corwin made them himself. Clara lifted the vial labeled Isolde. Her name, her ancestors, glimmered faintly beneath the dust. The cork was brittle, marked with an old red fingerprint. Inside the box's lid lay a final envelope, unsealed on its front, in Corwin's hand. "For those who come after." She opened it carefully. Inside were 2 photographs. The first showed the 5 nuns kneeling before the altar, faces serene. The second, taken perhaps moments later, showed the same scene, but with a man standing behind them, his hand resting on Sister Isolde's shoulder. His face was blurred, but his build and uniform were unmistakable. Detective Harold Finch. That evening, Clara sat in her van, overlooking the cliffs, wind battering the windshield. She spoke into her recorder. "Father Matthias Corwin, confessor. 5 sisters, 1 pregnancy. Harold Finch photographed inside the cloister, though records say he arrived only after they vanished. The evidence suggests collusion, perhaps worse. The phrase, 'one child survived,' keeps returning. If that's true, whose child was it? And how did Finch's blood end up on the rosary?" She looked down at the vial of salt-like dust lying in her palm. The label had begun to peel. Beneath it, faintly etched into the glass, she saw numbers. Number 6. There had only been 5 sisters. The next day, she returned to Malik's lab. He met her at the door, expression grim. "We re-examined the remains," he said. "Your hunch about a 6th body may be right. We found a small femur fragment, child-sized, embedded in the linen around Sister Isolde's bundle. DNA's degraded, but it carries the same maternal markers." Clara swallowed. "A baby. Probably stillborn, or killed during delivery. Someone buried it with the others. Or walled them in together," she said, "as penance." Malik rubbed his eyes. "The pathology suggests blunt trauma before death for the adults, post-mortem fractures on the infant. Whoever did this wanted to erase every trace." He looked up. "You sure you're ready for what you're digging up?" She met his gaze. "I don't think I have a choice anymore." Back at her motel, she pieced together the timeline on the wall, with tape and photographs. 1932. Confession of pregnancy. Finch's arrival. Vanishing of 5 nuns. Wall sealed. 2022. DNA link. Rediscovery. Across it all, she wrote in red marker, "Why would a detective help build a tomb?" Her laptop pinged with a new message from the anonymous sender. Subject: "She knew you'd come." Attached was an audio file. Clara hesitated, then pressed play. A woman's voice crackled through, distant, echoing, like a phonograph cylinder. Father says the child will be pure if the walls hold, but she cries at night. He says it is the devil testing faith. I fear he lies. Then a scream cut through the static, and the file ended. She sat frozen, the sound vibrating in her ears. The voice was young, terrified, and painfully human. She replayed it, slowing the speed. In the background, a second voice whispered words in Latin. Custodi nos a malo. Deliver us from evil. She sent the clip to Malik for spectral analysis, then drove back to the convent before dawn. The fog was thick, moonlight diluted into silver vapor. Inside the chapel, the stone walls sweated moisture. She placed her recorder on the altar and whispered, "If you're still here, tell me what you want." For a moment, nothing. Then the faintest tap echoed through the recess. One pause. One. Pause. One. 3 knocks. Deliberate. Her breath caught. Isolde? A whisper brushed her ear. Feather light, barely more than breath. Find the ledger. Sunlight found her there hours later, curled on the floor with her camera beside her. She packed up quickly, feeling foolish. Yet when she reviewed the audio in daylight, the knocks were there, 3 distinct beats, followed by a phrase low and blurred, but clear enough for software to translate later. Ledger under altar. By afternoon, workers restoring the chapel uncovered a small lead box cemented beneath the stone dais. Inside lay a journal bound in decayed leather. The name etched on the first page froze Clara where she stood. Harold Finch. Rain whispered against the chapel roof as Clara knelt beside the workers prying open the lead box. The stale air that escaped smelled of iron and candle smoke. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, was a small leather-bound book. Its cover was dark with age, edges scalloped like burnt paper, etched into the spine. HF-1932. The foreman handed it to her with gloved hands. You'll want to wear a mask. Stuff's probably full of mold. Clara nodded, sliding it into a sterile evidence bag before rushing back to her van. She sat in the driver's seat as rain drummed overhead, heart thudding. Her fingers shook as she opened the first page. The ink had bled into the paper, but the words were legible, precise. The handwriting of a methodical man, November 3rd, 1932. The Mother Superior reports 5 sisters missing. I have reason to doubt her account. Parish whispers suggest they prepared for departure. I will remain on site until clarity is achieved. The next entries darkened, the lines pressed hard, as if written in anger. November 7th. They lie, all of them. One confesses in fragments. The child is born. The father forgives. She would not name him. I believe Father Corwin has deceived them with talk of cleansing ritual. Clara flipped further. November 11th. Corwin insists the ceremony is for redemption. He says the wall must be sealed to protect the innocent. He has lost reason. Tonight I will witness, to prevent further sin. A dark smear streaked the page. Perhaps blood. Perhaps ink spilled in haste. November 12th. I could not stop them. The child's cry ended too soon. Corwin ordered the bricks laid while they prayed. When I tried to intervene, one struck me with the mallet. I bled upon the altar. I sealed the rest myself, so none would ever know. The final entry was a single line, written in shaking script. Forgive me, Lord, for making a tomb of your house. Clara sat back, breath shallow. The windshield fogged with condensation. She felt as though the book itself radiated the weight of its confession. She whispered into her recorder. Finch wasn't their killer. He tried to stop it. His blood marked the rosary because he bled trying to save them. Her phone buzzed. Malik again. We analyzed that audio you sent, he said. Voice print comparison with known historical recordings suggests a match with Father Matthias Corwin. That's impossible, Clara said. He's been dead for 80 years. I know. The audio's a copy from an Edison wax cylinder found in the diocese archives. Someone re-recorded it and sent it to you, which means whoever's feeding you this material has access to restricted files, or is trying to finish what Corwin started, she said quietly. That evening she returned to the rectory. Father Thomas met her at the door, face pale. You've been busy, he said, voice trembling. The bishop called. He wants all materials turned over immediately. Someone sent me Corwin's recordings, she said. Why would the diocese still have them? He sighed heavily. Because some secrets are safer locked away than erased. Safer for whom? She asked. He hesitated, then led her into the sanctuary. I shouldn't show you this, he said. Unlocking a side cabinet inside, wrapped in cloth, was a brass censer and a stack of yellowed papers. These are Corwin's final letters to the Archbishop. He claimed the sisters were possessed. He sought permission for an exorcism. Clara skimmed the letterheads, her pulse quickening. The taint spreads from womb to womb. One line read, If we do not purge it, the bloodline will carry the corruption into the next age. She looked up. He thought the child was evil, or convinced himself of it, Father Thomas said. The church buried the scandal under theology. Finch's ledger says Corwin ordered the sealing. If that's true, this was murder. Ritualized murder, the priest said softly. And perhaps a kind the church could not bear to admit. That night, Clara drove to the cliff's edge, where the convent walls met the sea. The storm had passed, leaving the air heavy and raw. Below, waves crashed against the rocks, scattering spray into moonlight. She read Finch's last line again. Forgive me, Lord, for making a tomb of your house. Her phone vibrated with another message, same anonymous address. Subject, the wall is not empty. No text, only a short video file. She tapped play. The footage was shaky, lit by flashlight beams moving across the chapel's recess. The camera stopped on the spot where the wall had been opened. In the dust, someone had traced a symbol, a circle of 5 interlocking lines around a smaller sixth. The voice behind the camera whispered, they were meant to guard it. The feed cut to black. Clara replayed it, freezing on the symbol. She searched her notes and found a sketch from Corwin's margin. A matching sigil labeled Sigillum Custodiae, the seal of custody. Its purpose? To contain what was forbidden to speak. Her pulse quickened. What if the wall wasn't meant to imprison the sisters, but to imprison something else? The next morning, Malik arrived at her motel, bleary-eyed and holding printouts. I traced that email address, he said. It's routed through the diocese's private server. So, the church is feeding me breadcrumbs, Clara said, or someone inside wants the truth out. He placed another page on the table, a genealogical chart. We've identified the child's lineage. There's a continuous female line from 1932 to present day. You, Clara, are the latest link. Corwin's bloodline of corruption. That's you. She stared at him, words evaporating. He believed my family carried some curse. Superstition, sure, Malik said. But maybe it's simpler. Maybe Finch hid evidence of what the church did to silence the scandal, and your DNA dragged it back into light. Clara felt a shiver crawl along her spine. If that's true, they won't stop me from finishing this. Malik hesitated. Just remember, people kill to protect legends. That evening, she returned alone to the chapel. The tide was high. Waves hissed through cracks in the foundation. She set her camera on the altar, opened Finch's ledger beside the rosary, and began to record. Detective Harold Finch documented the truth. Father Corwin and Mother Ignace sealed 5 women and a child behind this wall in an act they called purification. The Church suppressed it, burying their sin for nearly a century. Tonight, their voices will finally be heard. As she spoke, a low vibration shuddered through the floor, subtle at first, then stronger. The candles on the altar flickered, though no wind stirred. She froze. From the open recess came a whisper, faint yet unmistakable. Clara. Her own name, breathed from stone. The recorder captured her gasp, the scrape of her chair. The whisper came again, softer, pleading. Help us. The storm returned by nightfall. Thunder rolled over the cliffs, like an animal circling its prey. Clara parked the van at the base of the hill and hiked toward the convent ruins, with her camera gear slung across her shoulder, rain slicking her hair to her temples. She should have waited for Moloch or for a warrant. But the whisper she'd heard, help us, wouldn't leave her head. It had the tremor of truth, not imagination. Inside the chapel, the air was thick with damp stone and candle wax. The power had long been cut, yet her portable light cast the room in harsh white angles. She set her camera on its tripod, facing the altar, and pressed record. Time stamp. 2:14 a.m., she whispered. Returning to St. Hilda's to document evidence of substructure beneath the sanctuary, possible sealed chamber, corresponding with Finch's ledger entry from November 12, 1932. She placed her hand on the altar stone. It was cold, but faintly hollow beneath her palm. Using a small hammer and chisel, she began working at the mortar around its base. Each strike echoed like a gunshot through the empty nave. After several minutes, a crack opened along the floor seam. Beneath it, darkness yawned. She aimed her flashlight into the fissure and saw what looked like a set of narrow steps spiraling down into the bedrock. Her voice trembled on the recording. There's a secondary passage below the altar, possibly built for drainage or storage. Descending now. The steps were slick with condensation, the air colder with each foot downward. The beam of her flashlight quivered over limestone walls, scored by old tool marks. The staircase ended at an arched doorway sealed by a rusted iron gate. She pushed. The hinges groaned, then gave way. Beyond lay a crypt-like chamber, no larger than a small bedroom. Water dripped steadily from the ceiling into a stone basin at the center. Around the basin were 5 recesses in the wall, each containing a small niche of bones. But one niche, at the far end, had been disturbed. The mortar fresh. She approached slowly, camera trembling in her hand. A cloth bundle lay half buried in the rubble, smaller than the others, wrapped in disintegrating linen. It looked too small to be an adult. She knelt, breath clouding in the cold air, and unwrapped a corner. Inside was a tiny skull. She turned to the camera. This confirms the existence of the child. DNA match probable with remains found upstairs. This is the... A sound interrupted her. A faint metallic click, somewhere above. She froze. The gate at the stairwell had swung shut on its own, or by someone else's hand. A beam of light flickered through the cracks, followed by footsteps. "Hello?" she called, her voice thin against the stone. "Who's there?" No answer. The footsteps paused. Then a man's voice echoed down. Calm, almost familiar. "You shouldn't be here, Miss Hensley." She lifted her light. The figure at the top of the stairs wore a long coat, hood drawn. "Father Thomas?" she asked. He descended slowly, each step deliberate. "You're trespassing on consecrated ground," he said. His tone had lost its gentleness. "There are things that should never be exhumed." "You knew," she said, backing toward the basin. You knew about the chamber. I tried to keep you from it, he replied. The ledger, the relics, those were meant to stay buried. Some sins are mercifully forgotten. Clara steadied the camera toward him. You're protecting Corwin's legacy. I'm protecting souls, he said quietly. Yours included. That wall was not a tomb's. It was a seal. Seal against what? She demanded. A woman? A child? He hesitated, rainwater dripping from his coat. You think this is about human cruelty. But Corwin believed something else entered those walls that night. He said the child's eyes were wrong. That when she cried, the others heard their own voices speaking back. He thought she was touched by something not of God. Clara swallowed hard. And you believe that? Father Thomas looked away. Belief isn't the word. But when the Masons reopened the foundation in 1954, 3 of them died within weeks. One cut his own throat on the altar rail. The records were sealed again. The dripping water seemed louder. Clara forced herself to speak. Whatever haunted this place, it's history now. It can't hurt us. He stepped closer. Can't it? You of all people should know it isn't finished. That bloodline of yours, Corwin's prophecy. Prophecy, she interrupted. He stopped at the bottom step. He wrote that the corruption would return in the 6th generation. The 6th sister, born outside the convent walls. Clara's breath caught. You mean me? He nodded. You opened what was meant to remain sealed. The camera captured what happened next, in a single trembling shot. The overhead light flickered and died, plunging the crypt into near darkness. A deep hum rose from the basin, like air being drawn through a hollow pipe. Water began to churn violently. Clara stumbled back, the flashlight jerking. Father, what's happening? She shouted. His voice came ragged. Run! From the basin erupted a burst of cold air, carrying with it a sound, neither wind nor human voice, but something layered, a chorus of whispered pleas, merging into one. Help us. The pressure forced the air from Clara's lungs. She clawed toward the stairs, grabbing the gate as it slammed shut again. Father Thomas reached through the bars, pulling her up with both hands. Behind them, the chamber glowed faintly, a phosphorescent shimmer illuminating the niches. The child's skull had rolled free of its wrappings. Its hollow sockets gleamed with reflected light. They stumbled into the chapel, gasping. The altar stone thudded closed behind them, with a sound like the earth sealing itself. Clara pressed her back to the wall, trembling. Father Thomas sank to his knees, murmuring prayers under his breath. What was that? She whispered. He wiped his mouth with a shaking hand. Not a ghost, he said. Something older. Corwin called it the echo of faith undone. By dawn, the storm had passed again. Leaving the chapel silent, Clara replayed the camera footage. The final frames showed the basin's water, forming a perfect circle, before the light exploded white. In the milliseconds before the cutoff, a shape was visible. 5 figures kneeling, their outlines of light surrounding a smaller one in the center. She saved the footage to 3 separate drives and locked them in her case. Then she turned to Father Thomas, who sat pale and exhausted by the altar. I'm taking this to the police, she said. He nodded wearily. Do what you must, just remember, truth is never free. She hesitated at the chapel door, looking back at the cracked stone. The whisper still echoed faintly in her ears, but it was different now, calmer, almost grateful. Thank you. Morning sunlight broke through the fog, like gold dust, as Clara drove toward Augusta. The highway steamed with last night's rain, and her camera case sat seat-belted beside her like a passenger. She hadn't slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the child's skull and heard that impossible whisper of thanks. At the State Forensic Complex, Malik met her at the security gate, coffee in hand, looking as though he too hadn't slept. "You brought the footage," she nodded, "and samples from the crypt, bone dust, fabric fibers, water residue." They walked through the sterile hallway to the analysis suite. Clara handed over the external drives. "I want you to tell me if what happened in that room can be explained." Malik smiled faintly. "Everything's explainable, given enough data. Question is whether you'll like the explanation." He loaded the footage. As the screen replayed the churning basin and the flash of light, he froze the frame at the instant the figures appeared. "Infrared bleed," he said. "But the pattern's peculiar. Heat signatures forming distinct human outlines." "Meaning?" "Meaning those shapes weren't hallucination or reflection. Something with mass and temperature was there, however briefly." Clara's stomach tightened. "Residual bodies, or energy release from rapid chemical change," he said. "The water in the basin was saturated with trace nitrates and calcium oxide, old quicklime. Add heat from microbial reaction, and you get, well, not ghosts, but something that looks like them." He turned to her. "Still, that doesn't explain the voice." Clara placed her recorder on the desk and played the audio. 5 overlapping tones, saying "Thank you." Malik ran it through spectral analysis. The waveform split into layers, 5 distinct female voice prints. They line up with the earlier chants from the 1932 wax recordings. He murmured, "Perfect match. The sisters." Clara rubbed her temples. So they weren't asking for help anymore. They were acknowledging release. "Or closure," Malik said quietly. "Maybe opening the chamber completed whatever cycle began there." An hour later, Malik pulled up the latest genetic results. "We finished sequencing the remains," he said. "Every sister shares half her genome with the infant. All maternal, no paternal markers. The child was a clone, in primitive terms, a replication of one woman's cells." Clara blinked. "That's impossible for 1932. "Scientifically, yes, but biologically?" He rotated the model on screen. "Identical mitochondrial DNA across 6 bodies implies parthenogenesis, self-fertilization rare in mammals, but not unheard of in early theoretical research. Corwin might have believed he'd witnessed a miracle of immaculate conception, when in fact it was a biological anomaly." Clara stared at the screen. "So, Sister Isolde, my ancestor, gave birth to herself." Malik hesitated. "In a sense. And that means your genome is the same continuation. You are the 6th iteration." She felt dizzy. "The prophecy, the 6th generation?" "Exactly." He leaned closer. "If the genetic line carries instability, you could be experiencing echoes, hallucinations, auditory crosstalk, memories encoded in DNA." Clara shook her head. "Those weren't hallucinations, Malik. The voices were real." "Maybe both," he said softly. "Trauma imprinted so deep, it became molecular." That night, she filmed a segment in her motel room. The camera captured her pale reflection in the window, thunder clouds gathering outside. For 90 years, the convent kept a secret that science now unravels. A woman bore a child without a father, and the church called it heresy. They sealed her away to stop the bloodline. But the bloodline lived, and I am proof. She stopped recording, suddenly aware of a faint hum coming from the laptop. The screen flickered, then glitched. Words appeared in the editing window, though her hands were still. "He watches through your eyes." The message vanished as quickly as it appeared. Her pulse raced. She unplugged the laptop and backed away, heart hammering. Rain began again, tapping the glass in quick, arrhythmic beats. Her phone rang. It was Malik. "You need to come back to the lab," he said, voice urgent. Something's wrong with the samples. When she arrived, technicians were already sealing the analysis room. A chemical odor hung in the air, ozone and metal. Malik met her at the door wearing gloves. The bone dust reacted with the air. It started producing heat, enough to scorch the tray. He held up a thermal image. The remains glowed like living tissue. "They're metabolically active," he said. "Impossible, but happening." "Alive?" Clara whispered. "Not in the way we understand it. More like the DNA's replicating, using environmental carbon as substrate. It's rewriting itself." Clara looked at the sealed containment chamber, where the samples pulsed faintly, like embers under ash. "If it's rewriting, what is it becoming?" Malik stared at the monitor. Something new, or something old trying to return. She left the facility near dawn, the first pale light glinting off wet asphalt. The town of St. Augustine lay quiet below the hill, innocent, unknowing. In her rear-view mirror, the lab lights flickered once, then steadied. Her phone buzzed with a new message from the anonymous address. Subject: "The blood remembers." Attached: a still frame from her own video feed. Her face, eyes blacked out. She gripped the wheel until her knuckles whitened. "You want to scare me," she said aloud, "but I'm not stopping." By evening, she was back at the chapel, setting up new sensors along the floor, where the altar stood. She spoke into her recorder, her voice calm but steady. "Every question leads here, to this ground. The science says mutation, the church says curse. Maybe both are just different languages for the same wound. Tonight, I'm closing the loop. Whatever lives in this DNA began here, and it ends here." Wind moved through the broken windows, carrying the faint scent of salt and roses. For a moment, she thought she heard distant singing again, 5 voices blending into one. She smiled despite the chill. "Maybe you're free now," she whispered. "Maybe that's enough." The candles flickered, and somewhere in the shadows behind the altar, something answered, not with words, but with the sound of a single heartbeat echoing through the stone. The first thing Clara noticed when she returned to the forensic complex was the smell. Ozone, disinfectant, something sharp like burned sugar. The building hummed, as if a transformer somewhere deep inside were overloading. Malik met her in the corridor, his face drawn. "Come see this," he said. Inside the containment lab, the samples from St. Hilda's glowed faintly inside their sealed acrylic chambers. Each dish pulsed in time with the next, a slow, synchronous rhythm like breathing. "We've been monitoring them for 12 hours, Malik said. "The DNA strands are forming repeating sequences, identical patterns across all 5 samples. When we convert the sequence to binary, we get structured data." Clara blinked. "Data?" "Language," he corrected, "not random mutation. Organized repetition that corresponds to phonetic patterns." On the monitor, rows of numbers scrolled past. 010, 00110, 010, 000, 10100, 100, 100, 10000. Malik hit a key. The translation appeared. Faith. Clara's pulse quickened. "It's spelling words." He nodded. "Every time the sequence replicates, new text emerges. So far, we've recorded faith, mother, and return." She leaned closer to the glass. The samples were vibrating now, microscopic particles moving like silver dust in a current. "Could it be contamination?" "I thought so," Malik said. Then the control samples started to sync with it. "Meaning whatever this is, it's spreading," she whispered. Later, in the observation room, Malik replayed thermal footage of the specimens. Each pulse emitted a brief electromagnetic burst. "If we convert those frequencies into sound," he said, tapping at the console, "listen." A low hum filled the speakers, rising and falling in harmonic intervals. The rhythm was slow, almost musical, 5 tones repeating, then a pause. Clara closed her eyes. It was the same pattern the sisters had sung. In the 1932 recordings, she opened her eyes. They're singing through the DNA. Malik's voice dropped. Or, something is using the DNA to communicate. That night, Clara uploaded a short clip to her secure channel for analysis by outside experts. She didn't post it publicly. Too dangerous, too easily dismissed as digital trickery. Instead, she added a private note to her viewers. Evidence suggests genetic code, behaving as acoustic medium updates soon. She shut the laptop and rubbed her eyes. The motel's neon sign bled red light across the ceiling. For the first time, she wondered if the sisters' miracle was never about birth or death, but about communication. Faith becoming literal code. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Miss Hensley, a measured male voice said. This is Monsignor Vale, Office of Historical Doctrine. We need you to surrender all recovered materials from St. Hilda's immediately. She sat up. You've been monitoring me. Your actions risk desecration and scandal, he said evenly. Return the relics, the footage, and any DNA samples. Destroy your copies. I'm documenting crimes, not relics. You're tampering with something you don't understand, he said. Some truths are prisons, not revelations. The line went dead. The next morning, Malik called from his car. They tried to seize the lab data. Diocese lawyers showed up with federal observers, claiming biohazard concerns. I copied everything before they arrived. Good, Clara said. Meet me at the chapel tonight. Clara, think about this. Whatever we found, it isn't stable. The sequences are accelerating. We might be looking at self-propagating code, viral on a molecular level. I know, she said quietly. That's why I have to finish the story before they bury it again. Dusk turned the convent to copper, and Shadow Malik arrived with a small generator, his laptop, and a field spectrometer. Together they set up in the nave, cables snaking across the cracked stone. The samples pulsed in their containers, soft light bathing the altar. I'm running a live analysis, Malik said. If the sequence completes another word, we'll catch it. Clara turned on her camera. 90 years ago, St. Hilda's convent vanished under mystery and myth. Tonight, science meets faith. The code inside these remains may hold the final confession of the sisters themselves. The laptop beeped. Malik's eyes widened. It's forming new text. Letters appeared on the screen one by one. Child of the sixth. Clara felt the air thicken. It's speaking to me. Don't anthropomorphize data, Malik muttered, though his voice trembled. Another sequence scrolled. Open the sealed book. What sealed book? She asked aloud. As if in answer, the chapel's old organ emitted a single hollow chord. Dust sifted from the ceiling. Malik turned, startled. There's no power to that instrument. The sound came again, 2 notes this time, deep and resonant. The monitor flashed once more. Below. They exchanged a glance. Clara grabbed her flashlight and headed toward the crypt entrance. The staircase was slick with moisture again, the air colder. The basin in the center still shimmered faintly, but now the water's surface quivered like skin. Malik followed, muttering that this was madness. At the base of the basin lay a small, rusted chest, half buried in silt. Clara brushed it free. The lock had long corroded. She pried it open with a screwdriver. Inside was a book, vellum pages, bound in copper-threaded leather. The cover bore the sigil of 5 interlocking lines, surrounding a 6th point, the seal of custody. Malik whispered. They lifted the book carefully. The pages were water-stained but intact, filled with Latin text and diagrams of human figures surrounded by halos of light. In the margins, Father Corwin's cramped handwriting translated scripture into equations, ratios of blood, numbers corresponding to psalms. Clara traced a line with her finger. He thought faith itself could be engineered. At the back of the book lay a final page written in English. The child carries our voices. In her blood, the word becomes flesh again. When she awakens, the church will tremble. Her flashlight flickered. The basin water began to swirl. Malik slammed the chest shut. "We're leaving," he said. They scrambled up the steps as the hum grew louder, vibrating through the stone. By the time they reached the nave, every candle in the chapel had ignited at once. On the wall above the altar, moisture traced words in dripping lines. The word is alive. Outside, wind tore through the trees. Malik staggered to the van, clutching the chest. "This is beyond investigation," he said. "If this DNA learns to replicate outside containment, it won't stop at messages." Clara looked back at the glowing windows. "Maybe it's not trying to spread. Maybe it's trying to finish its sentence." He turned to her. "And if the last word isn't mercy?" She didn't answer. The first drops of rain began to fall, each one hissing as it struck the ground, as if the earth itself were too hot to bear them. Malik spread a clean sheet of mylar across the motel desk and laid the waterlogged volume on top. The pages gave off a faint metallic smell, something between iron and salt. Clara filmed as he eased the cover open with tweezers. "Late period vellum," he murmured. The copper threads were probably to conduct static or preserve charge. Corwin wasn't just writing theology, he was experimenting. The first pages were dense with Latin text. In the margins, formulas coiled around verses, "In principio erat verbum." Beside it, Corwin had drawn a spiral that looked suspiciously like a DNA helix. Decades before anyone knew what one was, Clara zoomed in with her camera. He thought language itself was alive. Malik translated softly. "The word binds flesh. The syllable shapes the cell." He believed that prayer could code matter. They worked late into the night, photographing each page. Every 10 sheets or so, a pattern repeated. 5 circles around a smaller one, numbers below, arranged like coordinates. Clara traced them with a pen. "Latitude and longitude," she whispered. "They point back to this place." At dawn, Malik turned a page that had been glued to the next between them, lay a sheet of thinner paper, covered in English handwriting. "To whomever finds this." The experiment succeeded. The sister's devotion gave it form. The child is the vessel. In her cells, the hymn continues. Should the code awaken, silence it, or be remade by it. Clara's voice trembled. He wasn't afraid of damnation. He was afraid of replication. Malik rubbed his temples. Replication of what, though? Faith? Consciousness? He pointed to the final paragraph. Silence it, or be remade by it. That's a scientist's warning, not a priest's. Later that morning, they carried the book to the university's microanalysis lab. Professor Eleni Karas, a linguist who'd once consulted on ciphered wartime documents, met them there. She adjusted her glasses, scanning the pages under ultraviolet light. "These symbols between the psalms," she said, "aren't Latin. They're phonetic markers, pitch notations." He was scoring language like music. "Can you translate them?" Clara asked. "I can try." Eleni ran the sequences through audio software. A tonal pattern emerged, a rising and falling chant. It was haunting, minor key, unmistakably human. She frowned. "This melody, where did you hear it first?" "The sisters' recordings," Clara said. Eleni's eyes widened. "Then this is their score." Corwin designed the chant to alter rhythm, breath, heart rate, maybe even cellular vibration. He was using prayer as biocode. Back at the motel, Malik uploaded the chant's frequency to the spectrometer. When converted into waveform, the pattern aligned perfectly with the pulsing rhythm of the glowing DNA samples, every peak, every pause. The living code and the hymn were the same. "It's feedback," Malik whispered. "They're responding to their own song." As the speakers played the chant at low volume, the sealed containers brightened. Condensation fogged the acrylic. Numbers scrolled across Malik's screen, new data strings forming faster than he could process. "Turn it off," Clara said. But the equipment wouldn't respond. The waveform expanded, the tone deepening until it vibrated in her chest. Then the monitor went black. In the silence that followed, a single word appeared on the dead screen. "Remember." They left the lab before anyone could ask questions and drove toward the cliffs. The wind smelled of seaweed and lightning. Clara set up her camera inside the chapel once more. The Book of Corwin open on the altar. The candles she'd left days earlier still stood, wicks white and unburned. She spoke softly to the lens. "We thought the past was buried under stone, but the code isn't ancient. It's continuous. It's in me, in every cell that carries their song." Maybe what Corwin built wasn't a curse. Maybe it was evolution by prayer. She opened the book to the final diagram. A human figure surrounded by 5 circles and a 6th above its heart. Within the central circle was written a single name, Isolde. Rain began to patter through the broken roof. For a moment, the sound matched the rhythm of the chant. Malik stood near the doorway checking readings on his tablet. Electromagnetic activities climbing. Same signature as before. Clara's eyes remained on the diagram. If this is meant to awaken, maybe it needs a conductor. "Don't," he warned. But she was already humming the first notes of the sisters' hymn. Her voice was low, uncertain at first, then steadier. The air vibrated. The book's copper threads shimmered, faint light tracing along them like veins. The candles flared, and the temperature dropped 10 degrees. Malik shouted her name, but she kept singing, eyes closed. When the final note left her lips, the chapel went utterly still. On the altar, the ink on the pages lifted, forming dark motes that swirled upward like dust caught in sunlight. They hung in the air, rearranging themselves into words that glowed before fading. "The 6th has awakened." Malik grabbed her shoulders. "Clara, stop. Whatever this is, it's using you." She opened her eyes. For an instant, he saw faint light behind them, the same amber hue as the samples. Then it was gone. She swayed, exhausted. "I saw them," she whispered. "All 5. They were standing behind you, smiling." "You need a hospital," he said. "I need to finish what they started." That night, they holed up in a safe house outside town. Rain hammered the tin roof. Malik transferred the data to a portable drive. "I'm sending this to a secure server. If anything happens to us, at least the information survives." Clara sat by the window, staring at her reflection. The faintest hum resonated in her throat, unintentional but rhythmic. She whispered to herself, "Remember." Her reflection mouthed the word back perfectly, half a second late. 2 nights after the incident in the chapel, Malik was woken by his phone buzzing against the nightstand. The screen glowed with dozens of alerts from Clara's private channel, unlisted videos she had uploaded only for review. Each file was supposed to be locked. He opened the first one. It showed the final footage from the chapel. Clara singing, the ink lifting off the pages, the words, "The 6th has awakened." Except now, the video had changed. In the new version, static shimmered between frames, and for a heartbeat, he saw faces, 5 veiled women, standing in the pews behind her. Their mouths moved, but there was no sound. Malik froze the frame. The data overlay registered a frequency spike, a harmonic pattern similar to the DNA resonance they'd measured earlier. Then, in a whisper through the speaker, "Remember." He sat upright. "Oh, God," he muttered. By dawn, the video had somehow leaked. It appeared on small paranormal forums, then rapidly spread across social media. Users reported a haunting hum when they replayed the clip. Others claimed their lights flickered in rhythm with the melody. At 9 a.m., Clara found Malik pacing outside the motel, phone pressed to his ear. "It's gone viral," he said, voice tight. "Millions of views. And listen." He played a compilation of clips from different users. Each recorded the same low-frequency hum beneath the soundtrack. Even when no audio was present, Clara paled. "It's copying itself." He nodded grimly. "Sound can code memory. If Corwin found a way to inscribe genetic response through vibration, then playback could theoretically trigger microcellular resonance." "In English," Clara said, her voice shaking. "You mean people listening to the chant could be changed?" "Not physically, not yet. But it's seeding something. Neurological imprint. Maybe a pattern the brain mistakes for language." They packed immediately, driving out of town before reporters found them. Clara kept scrolling through comments under the viral video. "I heard the voices in my sleep. The song knows my name. The sixth nun is here." "This isn't just hysteria," Malik said. "The pattern's repeating across geographic boundaries. It's as if the chant has become self-propagating code. Digital DNA." He pulled out his field spectrometer and recorded Clara humming unconsciously beside him. The readings spiked. "Clara, stop." She blinked, confused. "I didn't realize I was doing it." "Your vocal cords are resonating at the same frequency as the video's subharmonics. It's imprinting you." Clara turned away, gripping her jacket. "If that's true, then Corwin succeeded. I'm carrying the hymn." They reached Boston by nightfall and checked into a small inn. Under fake names, Malik called Dr. Eleni Karras, who'd been studying the chant's notation. She answered on the first ring. "Malik, something's happening," she said breathlessly. "The university servers crashed an hour ago. The audio files you sent started duplicating themselves, embedding into other documents, even PDFs. It's like the code learned how to hide. Can you isolate it?" "I'm trying, but the system keeps rebuilding. The chant appears to be using compression algorithms, modern ones, which makes no sense for a song written in 1932. Clara took the phone. "Eleni, you said the hymn affected rhythm and breath. Could it evolve?" "Music evolves every time it's heard," Eleni replied. "If this pattern carries biological syntax, hearing it might teach it new forms." At midnight, Malik dozed on the couch, while Clara watched the storm outside the inn's hallway. Light flickered. In the reflection of the window, she saw 5 silhouettes standing behind her, motionless, veiled. Her breath hitched, but when she turned, the room was empty. A soft hum filled her ears. It wasn't external. It came from inside her skull, behind the bones. "Remember." She grabbed her camera, pointed it at the mirror. The display flickered. For an instant, her reflection wore a habit and veil. Then the screen went black. "Malik," she whispered. He stirred awake. "They're here." He rubbed his eyes. "Who?" "The sisters. They want to finish it." Morning brought more chaos. News outlets reported mass power fluctuations across 3 states, all occurring exactly at 3:33 a.m. The same time Clara's mirror had gone dark. The frequency signature recorded by Malik matched perfectly with the chant's waveform. The two met Eleni at an abandoned research wing of the university, where she'd set up an isolated offline system. She gestured toward a soundproof chamber. If the chant is using digital propagation, we'll test its effect in isolation. No networks. Clara nodded and entered the chamber, headphones on, camera running. Malik sat behind the glass, beside Eleni, monitoring neural and physiological data. Eleni played a filtered version of the chant. For the first minute, Clara's vitals remained stable. Then the monitors spiked, heart rate doubling, brain activity surging into high gamma waves. Her lips moved, though no sound emerged. Malik turned up the gain. Through the static came a faint voice overlaying hers. "We are still here." Eleni's face drained of color. "That's multiple frequencies overlapping, like several voices using one throat." "Shut it off," Malik said. The sound cut. Clara slumped in the chair, breathing hard. "They showed me where they are," she whispered when Malik entered. "Under the chapel. There's a chamber sealed by concrete. That's where the first experiment happened." "How do you know?" "They sang it into me." They returned to the coastal ruins that evening. The tide was low, exposing jagged rock at the base of the cliffs. Clara led the way with a lantern, her movements purposeful, as though guided behind the altar. She knelt and pressed her palm to the floor. "Here." Malik brushed away dust and loose tiles, revealing a rusted metal ring set into the stone. Together they pulled, dislodging a square slab that concealed a spiral staircase descending into darkness. The air below was cold, smelling faintly of copper and salt. They descended carefully, their lantern light revealing walls covered in faded scripture and strange equations. At the base lay a circular chamber lined with glass cylinders. Inside, each was a faint silhouette, the remains of 5 women, preserved upright in viscous fluid, their faces serene. Clara's breath caught the nuns. The experiment? On a table before the tanks lay another book, smaller, bound in red leather. Malik opened it. The handwriting was Corwin's. "The flesh remembers what the soul forgets. Their voices endure in the blood. The 6th shall awaken only when the world is ready to listen." The lantern flickered. From the tanks, tiny bubbles rose, then stopped. The eyes of one figure, Sister Agnes, opened. Malik dropped the book. Clara stepped closer, drawn by something ancient and maternal. The eyelids twitched again, and through the still fluid came a faint hum. "It was the same melody, Malik," Clara whispered. "It's alive." The air inside the chamber was heavy, the sort of air that had never been meant to move again. Malik's breath came in visible clouds. Condensation streaked down the glass cylinders, where the preserved nuns stood. When Sister Agnes's eyes fluttered open, he thought at first it was a trick of light, refraction through the brine. But then the pupils tracked the lantern. Clara pressed her palm to the cylinder. "She can see us." A low vibration filled the floor. The other tanks quivered in sympathy, faint ripples spreading across the surface of their fluids. Malik stepped back, checking the radiation meter. The needle twitched violently toward red. "They're reacting to you," he said, "or to the chant inside you." Clara closed her eyes. "They want to speak." The vibration built until the entire chamber throbbed like a single lung. Malik's equipment recorded bursts of electromagnetic noise, each pulse carrying data signatures that resembled partial DNA strings. The nuns' hymn had become a biological broadcast. One by one, the lids of the cylinders released with a hiss. The scent of ozone and salt filled the room. The brine drained away, leaving the figures upright but unsupported. Their flesh impossibly looked new, unblemished, translucent. Malik whispered, "They've been preserved in suspended protein, not embalming fluid." It's cellular stasis. They've never died. Clara moved among them slowly, the hem of her coat brushing the wet floor. The sisters' lips began to move in unison. No sound at first, then a soft hum, low, harmonic, precisely the pitch of the ancient chant. The tone resonated through her chest until she felt her own voice join without consent. Malik shouted over the rising sound, "Clara, stop. You're sinking with them." She didn't answer. Light poured from the copper seams along the walls, tracing sigils that hadn't been visible before. For a moment, the chamber looked alive, pulsing like a heart. Then silence. Every gauge on Malik's equipment flatlined. The only sound was dripping water. Clara opened her eyes. They glowed faintly amber. "They showed me everything," she whispered. "Corwin built this place to hold the seed of resurrection. He found a way to record consciousness in DNA, faith as code." The sisters volunteered. "Volunteered?" Malik asked. They believed their souls could anchor the pattern until humanity was ready to merge faith and science. He stared at her. "And what about you?" Clara looked down at her trembling hands. "I'm the sixth vessel." That's what the book meant. A faint crack echoed through the chamber. One of the cylinders fractured, spilling viscous fluid across the floor. The liquid shimmered with microscopic mites, tiny luminous cells that crawled toward Clara's boots. Malik aimed his camera. "They're alive, self-propelled microorganisms." "They're fragments of the chant," Clara said quietly. "They're seeking the next host." He grabbed her wrist, pulling her back. "We can't let this spread. If this code gets outside—" "It already has," she interrupted, pointing toward his recorder. "Every frequency you captured, every upload, it's the same pattern." Malik froze. The files he'd sent to Eleni, the viral video. The world had already heard the song. They climbed the staircase in silence, emerging into the chapel just as the storm broke. Lightning tore open the clouds, illuminating the altar and the shattered icons. Malik sealed the hatch behind them and wedged it with a beam of wood. "It won't hold forever," Clara said. "It just needs to hold long enough for us to contain the data," he replied. "We delete every copy, every recording. We silence the chant." Clara turned toward him, rain streaking her face. "If we silence it, we destroy them again. They sacrificed everything to become memory. They also unleashed something that could rewrite the human genome through sound." She hesitated. "Maybe that's no destruction. Maybe it's salvation." Malik's voice hardened. "You've seen what it does. It doesn't free. It erases." They argued through the downpour until thunder drowned them out. Finally, Clara stepped back toward the altar. "I can end it," she said. "The code responds to me. If I give it a final instruction, it will stop repeating." He shook his head. "You don't know that." "I do," she said, meeting his eyes. "Because I am it." She drew a deep breath and began to sing. Not the old hymn, but a counter melody, softer, descending instead of rising. The notes wove around the remembered chant, undoing it. Malik watched as the glow behind her eyes dimmed with each phrase. The chapel trembled below them. Something groaned, stone shifting, metal collapsing. The resonance built to a blinding flash of white, then faded. When silence fell, only rain remained. Hours later, rescue crews found Malik unconscious near the altar. The hatchway below was fused shut, as though the rock itself had melted. No trace of Clara remained, except for her camera, its memory card intact. On the footage, she finished the counter melody, smiled faintly and whispered, "Silence it, or be remade." Then the screen went black. Malik replayed the clip again and again, during recovery, searching for background noise, any hint of where she might have gone. All he heard was the storm, and faintly beneath it, a single heartbeat. Weeks passed. The viral videos vanished from the internet. Copies failed to load. Files corrupted beyond repair. Scientists studying the anomaly reported that the embedded frequencies had somehow self-neutralized. People who had experienced the humming described it fading from their dreams, replaced by quiet. Malik delivered the surviving documents to an international research archive, sealed under biosecurity. Classify it as a failed experiment, he told them, or a miracle, if you must. When he left the facility, the air smelled clean for the first time in months. He thought he could almost hear the ocean again. That night, he dreamed of the chapel, restored, sunlight streaming through unbroken glass. At the altar stood Clara, radiant, surrounded by the 5 sisters. She turned to him and smiled. "Remember," she said. Morning sunlight bled through the blinds of the hospital room. Malik blinked awake to the metronome rhythm of a heart monitor his own. He realized an IV line trailed from his wrist. The smell of antiseptic replaced the ocean air that had haunted him for weeks. Detective Alvarez sat in the corner with a notebook balanced on his knee. "You've been out 36 hours, he said. "We pulled you from the chapel. Firefighters found the staircase sealed like lava. What happened down there?" Malik studied the ceiling tiles. "Containment failure," he murmured. Then, correction. Correction? The system silenced itself. Alvarez frowned. "We found 6 sets of footprints. Only 5 bodies. Older remains, maybe from the 30s. No sign of the 6th person. Miss Dalton, Clara. Where is she?" Malik turned his face toward the window. "Gone." The detective left an hour later, unconvinced. Malik's discharge papers labeled his condition as stress-induced amnesia. The term amused him. He remembered too much. Outside the hospital, Boston was waking under pale November light. News vans still lingered near the waterfront, hoping for statements about the mystery collapse. He walked past them unnoticed, a ghost among the living. Eleni waited at a cafe 2 blocks away. Her hair was unkempt, eyes rimmed by sleepless nights. She slid a small envelope across the table. Inside lay a USB stick, sealed in wax. "I salvaged 1 file from your hard drive," she said. "The only one that didn't erase itself." "What's on it?" She hesitated. "A genomic sequence." Malik exhaled. "From Clara?" "Not exactly. From you. The lab ran a precautionary screen while you were unconscious. There's a pattern in your blood that matches the chance resonance curve, Malik. You're carrying fragments of it." He felt the world tilt slightly. "How is that possible?" Eleni folded her hands. "Sound can change structure. Maybe when she sang the counter melody, it rewrote you, instead of erasing itself." They reviewed the data at her office, the blinds drawn. The sequence glowed across the monitor like a constellation. 6 repeating clusters of nucleotides forming a perfect hexagonal symmetry. Embedded within the digital readout were faint tonal markers, frequency signatures recorded as numerical tags. "It's not random," Malik said. "It's notation." Eleni nodded. "A score written in flesh." She clicked a key and converted the numeric tags back into audio. The speakers emitted a low harmonic drone, familiar but incomplete. Half of the sisters' hymn, cut off mid-phrase. Malik felt the vibration in his bones. "It wants resolution," she said quietly. "Music unfinished." He shut the laptop. "Then we don't play it." Over the following days, official reports framed the chapel event as a geological collapse caused by lightning. The public moved on online. Only fragments of rumor remained. Posts about the song that healed itself, or the missing woman who stopped the hum. Algorithms buried them beneath newer distractions. Malik relocated to a coastal town farther north, renting a small house overlooking gray water. He told no one where he went. Each evening he watched the tide retreat, listening for echoes in the wind. The world had gone silent, but silence, he was learning, had texture. One night a letter arrived, postmarked from an untraceable address. Inside, a single Polaroid. The chapel restored, sunlight streaming through unbroken glass. At the altar stood 6 figures, 5 veiled women, and 1 unhooded. Clara's eyes looked directly into the lens. On the back, in her handwriting, "They're safe. The code sleeps." Malik's hands shook. The photograph was warm, as if just developed. Weeks slipped into winter. He buried himself in work, consulting, writing, pretending the world remained ordinary. But sometimes, when the wind cut across the water just right, a tone resonated in the house's wooden beams, and every cell in his body answered with a subtle hum. He began testing himself in secret. Blood samples under micro-imaging revealed faint luminescence along the helix, pulses that synced with his heartbeat. The code was alive but dormant, like a candle under glass. He recorded the phenomenon, encrypting files under multiple layers of security. The data glowed faintly blue, stable, safe. Until the night he received Eleni's call. Her voice trembled through the static. "Malik, we have a problem. The university conducted random DNA screenings on infants born this year. 1 in every 2,000 shows the same pattern as yours. That's impossible. I triple-checked it's global. Different continents, no shared ancestry." Malik's mouth went dry. So, the code didn't die with Clara. It propagated, she whispered, through the airwaves, the digital residue, maybe through you. It rewrote the template. Are they healthy? For now. Their cells emit a faint biophonic response when exposed to specific frequencies, like they're listening for something. What frequency? 63 hertz. The pitch of the sister's chant. He ended the call and sat in the dark for a long time, the sea outside whispering against the rocks. On his desk lay Clara's photograph. The edges curled from handling the 6 figures seemed to shift subtly each time he looked. Light playing tricks, he told himself. If the code had seeded the next generation, what had they inherited? Memory? Harmony? Or a call to continue the experiment Corwin began? He thought of Clara's final words. Silence it, or be remade. Perhaps silence was never meant to be eternal. Only preparation. At dawn, Malik drove to the nearest clinic and volunteered a blood sample for routine research. He watched the nurse label the vial with his name. "Keep it frozen," he said. "Someday someone will need it." She smiled politely, unaware of the weight in his voice. Outside, snow began to fall, fine white ash dissolving on the pavement. The world felt new, freshly coated. He raised his face to the sky and, without meaning to, hummed a single low note. Somewhere deep inside, 6 tones answered in harmony. The first of the children began to hum in their sleep. Nurses noticed it before the parents did. Soft, almost harmonic, not quite a lullaby, not random either. Hospitals across 3 continents reported identical tones, recorded on night shift monitors. 6 low notes, 1 high. The pitch measured precisely 63 hertz. Malik read the reports in silence. Each description was a mirror of the last. No distress, no change in vital signs. The children appear peaceful. He sat in the small house overlooking the frozen bay, the radio murmuring. On clear nights, the wind through the eaves still carried that faint resonance, like the sea breathing through a shell. Clara's photograph rested on his desk. The faces of the 6 figures now seemed lighter, almost translucent. as if the paper itself remembered light too well. Eleni called from Geneva. "The pattern's stabilizing," she said. "The kids aren't sick. Their neural scans show synchronous theta waves, shared rhythm across different brains. They're connected." "Through the code," Malik said. She hesitated. "Or through whatever the code awoke. It isn't infection. It's coherence. They're tuned to each other." He imagined hundreds of infants humming in perfect unison, a quiet planet-wide chord, rising beneath the noise of machines. "If it's coherence," he asked, "what are they aligning to?" Eleni's voice softened. "Maybe to her. Maybe to the song she left behind. That night, youth, ye dreamt of the chapel again. Not ruined this time. Rebuilt. Candles burned steady, unafraid of wind. Clara stood at the altar, radiant, the 5 sisters beside her. She looked over her shoulder and smiled. "Listen," she said. Her voice filled the nave like sunlight. "They're learning to speak the language we forgot." When Malik woke, the hum was real, vibrating through the walls of his house. He stepped outside, into the pre-dawn gray. The sound wasn't coming from speakers or engines. It came from the air itself, low, resonant, everywhere. By morning, the news had caught up. The global lullaby, anchors called it. People posted recordings, entire neighborhoods vibrating gently at 63 hertz. There was no source, yet instruments registered measurable pressure waves. Panic didn't come immediately. The sound was too soft, too soothing. Farmers said their cattle calmed, crops grew greener, heart rates dropped worldwide. Governments convened scientists, theologians, physicists. The church released a cautious statement about the mystery of shared grace. Others whispered about an alien signal. Only Malik and Eleni knew the frequency wasn't from the stars. It was born under stone, in faith and fear. Eleni arrived 2 days later, windblown and pale. "They're starting to speak," she said before he could offer coffee. She opened her laptop. A dozen video feeds showed toddlers in clinics across the world, mouths forming the same phonemes, though none had been taught words. "What are they saying?" She hesitated. "It's Old Latin mixed with harmonic syllables. Rough translation, we remember." The words chilled him. "Remember what?" "Perhaps everything," she said. The chant was memory encoded in blood. Now, it's memory dispersed through humanity. Malik closed the computer gently. "Then maybe that's what resurrection means. Not bodies rising, but remembrance restoring." Outside, snow began to fall thick and silent. Through the flurries, the low hum deepened, joined by higher overtones. A natural choir forming from the wind. The sea, the distant city lights. Malik felt the sound move through him like pulse, neither frightening nor loud. Simply there, he looked at Eleni. "If this continues, we'll change as a species. No borders, no solitude. Every mind in resonance." "Would that be so terrible?" she asked. "I don't know," he said, "but we won't be us anymore." That evening they hiked down to the shoreline, where the waves broke against black rock. The hum rose from the water like breath. Malik carried a small recorder, the same one he'd used in the chapel. He switched it on. Field note, November 15th. The harmonic field now encompasses the entire coast. Children's frequencies identical to environmental baseline hypothesis. Global phase transition. Collective neural alignment. He lowered the device. If she could hear this, she'd call it grace. Eleni looked toward the horizon. Maybe she does. Near midnight, power failed across the town. Lights winked out one by one, until only moonlight remained. The sea glowed faintly with bioluminescent foam, each crest matching the rhythm of the hum. Eleni gripped his arm. "It's not random. It's pulse synchronization. every living cell responding to the same beat. The world seemed to inhale. For a moment there was absolute stillness, a silence so deep it vibrated. Then a single unified chord rang out, rich, layered, achingly human. It lasted less than a heartbeat, but filled the sky. When the sound faded, the stars looked closer. In the days that followed, scientists recorded unprecedented neural calm across global populations. Violence dipped, heart disease rates fell, sleep patterns aligned. No one could explain it. The hum continued faintly, woven into the background noise of Earth itself. A second heartbeat beneath the first Malek and Eleni retreated to the chapel ruins, now peaceful. The sea had receded from its base, revealing the old foundation. Inside, moss covered the altar, where the Book of Corwin once lay. Malek set down his recorder and spoke softly. "If anyone finds this, know that the experiment ended as prayer. The sisters are gone, but their song endures. In us, we didn't silence it. We became to you its echo." He switched off the recorder and listened. The wind through the cracks carried a gentle melody, neither word nor note, simply presence. He smiled. Eleni whispered, "Do you hear her?" "Yes," he said, "and she's not alone." When they stepped outside, dawn was rising. Children stood along the ridge above the sea, watching the horizon. None spoke, but their breath made tiny clouds that merged into one drifting veil. They began to hum softly. The ancient tone reborn in new voices. Malik felt tears sting his eyes. "The choir," he murmured. Eleni nodded. Maybe that's what humanity was meant to become all along. A harmony, not a noise. The children's song swelled, folding the sound of the surf and the wind into itself until the whole coast seemed to sing. Malik closed his eyes. For the first time since the wall had opened, he felt no fear, only connection. Above them, the sky blushed with first light. The world kept humming, gentle, endless, alive. 10 years later, the world had grown quieter. Not silent, never silent, but tuned. Cities still throbbed with traffic. Children still shouted in the streets. Aircraft still carved thin scars across the sky. Yet beneath it all lay a hum so faint it had become the world's heartbeat. People had stopped noticing it. They moved in rhythm with it. Without thinking, Malik lived alone in a small house overlooking the new coastline, the old chapel's ruins visible at low tide. His hair had silvered, his hands trembled when he held a pen. Every morning he made tea and wrote a short note in the same leather-bound journal. Day 3642. The choir's frequency stable, at 63 Hz. No anomalies. Children entering adolescence report shared dreams, always of light under water, always of six figures singing. He set the pen down. Listening, the hum came through the window, constant and comforting. The choir had become background to life itself, soothing newborns, synchronizing heartbeats, turning prayer into biology. No religion had claimed it. No government could weaponize it. It was simply there, as natural as gravity. He switched on the old recorder, the one that had survived everything, and began to speak. If anyone ever finds these tapes, know that the story didn't end with silence. The song didn't conquer us. It joined us. We learned to breathe with it. He paused, sipping his tea. His voice had grown rougher with age. Sometimes I still wonder what became of her. Clara, if you're listening, if any part of you still moves through this code, know that the world you gave back to us is gentler than the one you left. That evening, clouds bruised the horizon. A storm was coming, the first in months. Malik stepped outside, recorder in hand. The air smelled of rain and salt, and something faintly metallic. He walked down to the beach as the tide withdrew. revealing the chapel's foundation stones like vertebrae. At the center stood a single column of coral-encrusted rock. The last trace of the altar, he knelt and placed the recorder on it. After the silence, he said softly, "Comes understanding. The choir doesn't sing for gods or men, it sings for balance." He looked up. Lightning stitched the horizon. The wind rose, carrying the hum until it filled the shore. Deeper now, layered for the first time in years, he heard words forming within it. "We remember." He smiled. "I know," he whispered. "So do I." When the rain began, he didn't move. The water sheeted off his coat, soaking the sand around his boots. Far out on the waves, flashes of bioluminescent green shimmered in time with the thunder. He realized they weren't random bursts, but patterns, rings of light expanding and contracting, matching the frequency he had recorded decades before. He took the recorder from the stone and pressed play. The hum answered instantly, aligning with the playback. The world seemed to lean toward the sound, every droplet vibrating. For a moment he felt the same low pull he'd felt in the crypt years earlier, a tug inside his blood. A faint figure appeared in the rain, female, translucent, woven from mist and light. Clara. She stood a few steps away, the storm bending around her. Her voice was not a whisper, but a chord. "You kept the promise." He nodded, tears warm against the cold rain. "You silenced it, without killing it. I only kept listening." "That's all faith ever asked," she said. "To listen." She smiled, and her outline began to dissolve into the rain. The hum faded back to its gentle, ever-present drone. When she vanished completely, only the storm remained. At dawn, the clouds cleared. Malik's recorder sat atop the altar stone, red light blinking, still recording. He had fallen asleep beside it. The first sunlight touched his face, and he stirred, smiling faintly. He rewound the tape, half expecting static. Instead, he heard his own voice followed by Clara's, clear, steady, undeniably real. He transferred the audio to a sealed drive, labeled it after the silence, and locked it in a waterproof case. Later that morning, he buried the case beneath the chapel stones and built a small cairn above it. The tide would cover it by evening, sealing the record where it belonged. Faith as code, he thought. Memory as mercy. Years would pass. The choir's tone would weave itself into architecture, into the hum of engines, into the way human speech naturally curved toward harmony. Children born into the new quiet world would know it instinctively, the sense that everything living shared the same rhythm. No one would remember when it began. They would simply breathe together. Some would call it evolution, others redemption. Malik, old now and nearly blind, called it balance. In his final entry he wrote, "The word became flesh. The flesh learned to sing. We are the echo and the silence between." He set down his pen, closed the journal, and listened one last time. The hum filled the room, the same note that had followed him for half a lifetime. He felt it steady his heart, align his breath. The line between sound and soul blurred. When his eyes closed, the tone held him, gentle as a lullaby. At low tide, the sea rolled back from the ruins. The recorder beneath the stones flickered to life once more, its tiny light pulsing in rhythm with the waves. From somewhere deep below the water came a faint chorus, 6 voices, distant but clear, carrying a melody the world now knew by heart. The wind took it and spread it across the horizon, over cities, forests, and deserts, until it merged with the planet's constant breath. Not warning, not miracle, just harmony.